When a critically injured Bigfoot was brought to my research laboratory in 1998, I never imagined that treating it would lead me to discover the most revolutionary secret in human history. What I learned about these creatures' true origin challenged everything we know about evolution, human development, and our place in the natural world. The truth I uncovered was so profound, so earth-shattering, that powerful forces have spent decades trying to ensure it remains buried. My name is Dr. Elias Mercer. I'm 43 years old, an evolutionary biologist specializing in primate genetics, and this is the story that cost me my career, my reputation, and nearly my life, but gave me the truth that the world desperately needs to hear. Before I reveal what I discovered about Bigfoot's true origins, you need to understand how this all began. September 14th, 1998. The date is burned into my memory because it's the day everything changed. I was working late at the Cascade Research Institute, a private facility nestled deep in the mountains of Washington State, about 40 miles from Seattle. The rain had been relentless that evening, drumming against the laboratory windows like impatient fingers, creating a hypnotic rhythm that made the hours blend together. Our lab specialized in studying genetic anomalies in endangered species, particularly large mammals native to the Pacific Northwest. I'd spent the last 15 years of my career there, rising from junior researcher to head of the evolutionary biology department. The facility was state-of-the-art, funded by a combination of government grants and private donations from conservation groups and biotech companies interested in genetic research. We had everything from advanced DNA sequencing equipment to surgical suites designed for large animals. Most importantly, we had discretion. Our remote location and strict confidentiality protocols made us the go-to facility for sensitive wildlife cases. I was in my office that Monday evening, reviewing genetic data from a mountain lion population study when my phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Dr. Sarah Chen, our facility director. "Elias, we have a situation," she said without preamble, her voice carrying that tight quality that meant something serious was happening. "I need you in the main surgical suite immediately, and Elias, clear your schedule for the next few days. You're not going to believe this." I'd known Sarah for 12 years. She was brilliant, unflappable, and not given to dramatic statements. If she said I wouldn't believe something, it was worth paying attention to. "On my way," I said, already grabbing my lab coat. The walk from my office to the surgical suite took maybe 3 minutes, but it felt longer. The facility was quiet at this hour. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving just the night crew. My footsteps echoed in the hallway, and I found myself moving faster, curiosity overriding my usual measured pace. The smell of antiseptic grew stronger as I approached the surgical area, a familiar scent that normally calmed me, not tonight. When I pushed through the double doors to the surgical suite, I stopped dead in my tracks. The room was set up for major surgery, monitors beeping, IV stands ready, surgical instruments laid out on sterile trays. But it was what lay on the examination table in the center that made my breath catch in my throat. On the table was something that shouldn't exist. It was massive, easily 8 feet long, covered in thick, dark brown hair matted with blood and dirt. The limbs were proportioned wrong for any known primate. Arms that were too long, legs too thick and powerful. The hands alone were the size of dinner plates, with opposable thumbs and nails instead of claws. And the face. The face was simultaneously familiar and utterly alien. A heavy brow ridge, a broad flat nose, a jaw that protruded slightly, like a human face viewed through a distorted lens, or a gorilla's face with unsettlingly human features. Is that? I couldn't finish the sentence. My scientific training was at war with what my eyes were seeing. "A Bigfoot," Sarah said quietly, standing on the other side of the examination table. Beside her was Dr. Marcus Reeves, our head veterinarian, and 2 veterinary technicians I recognized, Jennifer Ortiz and Kyle Tatterson. All of them looked as stunned as I felt. "That's impossible," I said automatically. "Bigfoot doesn't exist. It's a myth, a cultural legend. There's no scientific evidence." "There is now," Marcus interrupted, gesturing at the table. "Whatever this is, it's real, it's alive, and it's badly injured." I moved closer, my scientist's brain finally catching up to the situation. "Where did it come from?" "Highway 2 near Stevens Pass," Sarah explained. "A logging truck hit it early this morning. The driver called it in as a bear accident, but when state wildlife officers arrived, they realized it wasn't a bear. They contacted us because they knew we had the facilities and the discretion to handle something this unusual." I walked around the examination table, observing details with the clinical precision I'd developed over 15 years of scientific training. The creature was unconscious, breathing laboriously. I could see extensive injuries, lacerations across the torso, what looked like a fractured leg, possible internal damage. Blood had been drawn, bags hanging from IV stands keeping it stabilized. "You've already started treatment," I observed. "Had to," Marcus said. "It was going into shock when it arrived. We've stabilized it, but Elias, we need to know what we're dealing with. Is this a known species? Some kind of mutated bear? A gorilla that escaped from somewhere? We need your expertise." I pulled on gloves and began a closer examination. My hands were steady, despite the surreal nature of the situation. The hair was coarse, thicker than human hair, but finer than gorilla fur. The skin beneath, where I could see it around the injuries, was dark, but not as dark as a gorilla's. The musculature was incredibly developed. This creature had to be phenomenally strong. "Can I take samples?" I asked Sarah. "That's why I called you," she replied. "We need a full workup, DNA analysis, tissue samples, blood work, everything." I spent the next hour taking samples while Marcus and his team worked on treating the injuries. Hair samples, skin biopsies, blood draws. The creature remained unconscious throughout, sedated to keep it calm and pain-free while we worked. As I collected samples, I couldn't stop thinking about the implications. If this was really an unknown species of great ape in North America, it would revolutionize everything we knew about primate evolution, biogeography, and taxonomy. This wasn't just a new species. This was potentially the most significant biological discovery in a century. "I need to run these samples immediately," I said when I'd collected everything I needed. "We need to know what we're looking at genetically." "Agreed," Sarah said. "But Elias, this stays completely confidential until we understand what we have. No papers, no announcements, no leaks. If word gets out that we have a live Bigfoot here, we'll be overrun with media, cryptozoologists, and every crackpot with a theory." I nodded. Scientific discretion was something I understood well. Just us for now. I've sworn the others to secrecy. We'll need more help eventually, but for the initial analysis, I want our core team only. I took my samples to the genetics lab, a room I'd spent countless hours in over the years. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I was analyzing something that could rewrite textbooks. The DNA extraction process took several hours. I worked methodically, following protocols I'd performed hundreds of times, but my hands were shaking slightly as I loaded the samples into the sequencer. This was it. This would tell us what we were really dealing with. The initial sequencing results would take until morning, so I returned to the surgical suite to check on the patient. Marcus and his team had finished their immediate work. The creature was stabilized, injuries cleaned and bandaged, legs set in a cast. It was breathing easier now, the monitors showing stable vital signs. "Will it survive?" I asked. Marcus nodded. "Barring complications, yes. It's incredibly resilient. The injuries that would kill a human, or even a bear, this thing is handling remarkably well. Whatever it is, it's tough." I pulled up a chair beside the examination table, staring at the creature in repose. With its eyes closed and breathing steady, it looked almost peaceful, almost human. We took turns watching it through the night, monitoring its vital signs, adjusting medications as needed. Around 4 in the morning, something unexpected happened. It began to regain consciousness. The monitors started beeping more rapidly, and I looked up from my notes to see the creature's eyes open. Dark, intelligent eyes that fixed directly on me with an intensity that made me freeze in my chair. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds. Then it made a sound, low and resonant, almost like a question. "It's okay," I said softly, using the calm tone I'd use with any frightened patient. "You're safe. We're helping you. You were hit by a truck, but you're going to be okay." The creature tilted its head slightly, still watching me. Then, impossibly, it raised its uninjured arm and pointed at the cast on its leg, then at me. "You did this? You're helping me?" "Yes," I said, my heart pounding. "We set your leg. It was broken. The cast will help it heal." The creature studied the cast for a moment, then looked back at me. And then it did something that made my scientific worldview crack wide open. It nodded, a clear, deliberate nod of understanding. This wasn't just an unknown species of ape. This was something else entirely. I immediately called for Sarah and Marcus. Within minutes, the three of us stood around the examination table, watching as the creature tracked our movements with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "It's been awake for about 5 minutes," I explained, keeping my voice low and calm. "It understands us. Watch." I pointed at the cast on its leg, then at myself. "We helped you, fixed your leg." The creature looked at the cast, then at me, and nodded again. Sarah gasped audibly. "That's not possible," she whispered. That level of cognitive understanding, symbolic communication, that's human-level intelligence. Or close to it, I agreed. "Sarah, we need those DNA results now. Something's not adding up here." As if on cue, my pager went off, the genetics lab. The sequencing was complete. I asked Marcus to stay with the creature while Sarah and I hurried to the lab. Dr. Lisa Park, our senior geneticist, was at the computer terminal, her face pale as she stared at the screen. "Elias, you need to see this yourself," she said, her voice unsteady. "I've run the analysis 3 times. The results they're impossible." I moved beside her, looking at the screen. What I saw made my legs weak. I had to grip the edge of the desk to steady myself. "This can't be right," I said. "Run it again." "I already ran it 3 times, Lisa repeated. "Elias, the results are consistent. I don't understand how, but they're consistent." The DNA analysis was clear. The creature's genome was 98.7% identical to human DNA. That was closer than chimpanzees, which shared about 96% with humans. But what made my blood run cold was the specific nature of the similarities. "Look at chromosome 2, Lisa said, pointing at the screen. "It's a fusion of 2 chromosomes, just like in humans. This is the key marker that distinguishes humans from other great apes." "But look at these sequences," I said, scrolling through the data. "These genes here, they're associated with human brain development. The FOXP gene involved in speech and language. The ASPM gene linked to cerebral cortex development. This creature has human-specific genes." "Not just has them," Lisa corrected. "Look closer at the expression levels. These genes are active, Elias, fully functional." I spent the next hour poring over the data, cross-referencing it with every primate genome in our database. The conclusion was inescapable and terrifying in its implications. "This isn't a separate species that evolved parallel to humans," I said slowly, the realization dawning. "This is... Lisa, this is human. Or it was. This is a branch of the human family tree." "That's impossible," Lisa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "There is no evidence of any other human species surviving into modern times. Neanderthals died out 40,000 years ago, Denisovans even earlier." "Not all of them," I said, my mind racing. "What if some populations survived? What if they adapted to life in deep forests, became more robust, more hair-covered for cold climates? Over thousands of years, they'd look different, but Genetically, I trailed off, staring at the data. Then something else caught my eye. Lisa, look at this. These markers here, they're showing recent divergence. This isn't a species that split from humanity millions of years ago. This split happened relatively recently in evolutionary terms. How recently? I ran the calculations, checking them twice. Between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans were spreading out of Africa. The implications were staggering. Bigfoot wasn't some undiscovered ape. It was human, a parallel branch of humanity that had survived, hidden in the remote forests of the world while Homo sapiens dominated everywhere else. "We need to tell Sarah," Lisa said. "Elias, do you understand what this means? This changes everything about human evolution, about our understanding of who we are and where we came from." I printed out the results and headed back to the surgical suite, my mind reeling. Sarah was waiting outside, and I could see Marcus through the window, still monitoring the creature. "Elias, what did you find?" Sarah asked. I handed her the printout. "You're not going to believe this." Sarah read through the data, her eyes growing wider with each page. When she looked up at me, she was pale. "This is saying it's human, a subspecies of human." "Yes, or perhaps more accurately, a sister species, like how Neanderthals were to Homo sapiens. But Sarah, it's survived. An entire population has been living alongside us for thousands of years, and we never knew." "That's impossible. We would have found remains, fossils, evidence." "Would we?" I interrupted. "They clearly avoid humans. They live in the most remote areas. And if their population is small enough, scattered enough, their remains would be incredibly rare. Plus, if they have cultural practices around their deceased, we might never find them." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing. "We need to go in there and try to communicate with it. If it's human, truly human, then we have a responsibility to treat it as such, not as a specimen, but as..." "As what?" I said simply. "That's exactly what it is, Sarah. We're not dealing with an animal here. We're dealing with another type of human being, one that's been hiding from us for millennia." We entered the surgical suite together. The creature was still awake, its eyes following us as we approached. Marcus stepped aside, giving us space. "I'm going to try something," I said. I pulled up a chair and sat down, positioning myself at eye level with the creature, not standing over it, not in a position of dominance, but as an equal. "Can you understand me?" I asked clearly. The creature watched me for a moment, then nodded, one clear, deliberate nod of understanding. My heart raced. "Do you have language? Can you speak?" It opened its mouth, and a sound came out, a low vocalization that had structure, rhythm. "Your vocal anatomy is different," I said, more to myself than to it. "You probably have your own language, but you can't produce our sounds." The creature made a frustrated sound, then did something remarkable. It pointed at its throat, made a sound, then shook its head. Then it pointed at its ears and nodded. Then it pointed at me and mimicked my mouth moving. "You can understand our language, but you can't speak it," I interpreted. "You're telling me you comprehend what I'm saying, but you can't respond in words?" It nodded emphatically, and I saw what looked like relief in its eyes. Finally, someone understood. "Can you communicate in other ways? Gestures? Signs?" It held up its good hand and began making deliberate movements with its fingers. Not random gestures, but structured signs. It was using a form of sign language. "Sarah, get me paper and a pen," I said, never taking my eyes off the creature. When she brought them, I set them on the table within the creature's reach. "Can you write?" It looked at the paper, then at the pen, then at its bandaged hand and the cast on its leg. It made a frustrated sound. Clearly it wanted to, but couldn't with its injuries. Okay, different approach, I said. I'm going to ask you yes or no questions. Nod for yes, shake your head for no. Understand? A nod. Are there more of you? More of your kind? A nod. Do they live in these forests, the Cascades? Another nod. Have you been watching us? Humans, I mean. A nod, and something in its eyes that might have been wariness. Are you afraid of us? A long pause. Then, slowly, it nodded. The weight of that simple gesture hit me hard. This being, this person, had lived their entire life in fear of my species, hiding, watching, avoiding contact at all costs. And now, here it was, injured and vulnerable in our hands. "We won't hurt you," I said softly. "I promise. We want to help. We want to understand." It studied me for a long moment, those dark eyes searching mine. Then it did something that made my throat tight. It reached out with its good hand and touched my arm. Just a brief touch, a gesture of trust. "Elias," Sarah said quietly, "we need to decide what we do next. We can't keep this secret forever. The state wildlife officers know we have something unusual here." "When it's healthy enough to leave, we let it go," I said firmly. "Back to its people." "But the scientific importance is secondary to ethical treatment," I cut her off. "This isn't just a specimen, Sarah. This is a thinking, feeling being." I looked at the creature. "Will you stay? Let us treat you, help you heal? And in exchange, maybe you can teach us about your people." The creature considered this, then nodded slowly. Over the next 2 weeks, we established a communication system that transformed everything I thought I knew about human history. We discovered that the creature, we learned his name was something like Erato in his language, though we couldn't quite pronounce it, had an extraordinary capacity for language comprehension. He couldn't speak English due to anatomical differences in his vocal tract, but he understood everything we said. Jennifer, one of our vet techs, had taken some American Sign Language in college, and she became our primary interpreter. Erato adapted remarkably quickly to using standardized signs combined with his own gestural language. We learned that he was male, approximately 30 years old by his reckoning, and that he had a family, a mate, and 2 young children who would be worried about him. We set up a whiteboard in his room, and once his arm had healed enough, he began drawing. Not just simple shapes, but complex diagrams and maps. He showed us where he lived, deep in the most remote parts of the Cascade Range, areas so isolated that humans rarely ventured there. He drew his family's shelter, constructed of branches and foliage, designed to be temporary and leave minimal trace. "How many of you are there?" I asked one day, about 10 days into his recovery. Erato paused, thinking. Then he drew marks on the whiteboard, groups of 5 lines. He made 7 groups, then started an 8th, but stopped partway through. Roughly 37 or 38 individuals. "That's all?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with dismay. "In the entire Pacific Northwest?" Erato nodded, and there was something profoundly sad in his eyes. He drew more on the board, stick figures representing his people, then crossing them out one by one, a visual representation of population decline. "You're dying out," I said softly. "Your species is going extinct." He nodded again, then drew something else. Human figures, many of them, spreading across the board. Then he drew barriers between the humans and his people, mountains, forests, rivers. He pointed at the human figures, then made a gesture at himself and shook his head fearfully. "You've been hiding from us," I said. "For how long?" He thought for a moment, then began drawing on the board. This time he drew phases of the moon, then sun symbols, seasons, years. He drew so many marks that they filled the board, then gestured to indicate even more beyond what he could show. "Thousands of years," Lisa breathed. "You've been hiding from humans for thousands of years." Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He drew human figures with spears, hunting. He drew his own people running, falling. He drew what could only be interpreted as violence, conflict, death. "We hunted you," I said, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "Early humans, when we first encountered your people, we hunted you, competed with you, drove you away." He nodded, then drew more. He showed his people retreating into the mountains, into the deepest forests, learning to hide, to avoid humans at all costs. He was showing us a history of survival through isolation. "Is that why you're so scattered?" Marcus asked. "Small groups in remote areas, avoiding any place humans might go?" Another nod. Then he drew something else, family groups, a larger figure with smaller ones. He pointed at himself, then drew two smaller figures and made a cradling gesture. "You have children," I said, "a family." Erato's eyes filled with what I could only interpret as anguish. He nodded, then gestured at himself. "Trapped here in our facility." He made a questioning gesture. When could he go home? "Soon," I promised, "as soon as you're healed enough to travel safely. We'll take you back." The next day, I asked the question that had been nagging at me since I first saw the DNA results. "Your people and mine split apart tens of thousands of years ago," I said. "But you're so similar to us, the DNA, the intelligence, the culture. Why did we diverge? What made your ancestors become what you are and mine become what we are?" Erato considered this, then drew on the board two groups of early humans, identical. Then he drew one group in open plains, grasslands. He drew them hunting with tools, building fires, living in large groups. He pointed at me, my ancestors. Then he drew the other group in dense forests, mountains. He drew them adapting to that environment, growing larger, stronger, more hair for cold climates, learning to live in smaller family groups where resources were scattered. He pointed at himself, his ancestors. "Different environments created different evolutionary pressures," I said, understanding. "My ancestors stayed in open environments, developed technology, social complexity. Yours adapted to deep forest life, became physically stronger, but remained in small, scattered groups." He nodded. Then he drew something else that made me pause. He showed both groups meeting occasionally over thousands of years, sometimes fighting, but sometimes trading, communicating. "You interbred with us," I said suddenly, "just like modern humans did with Neanderthals. There are probably genes from your people in some human populations." Erato made a gesture that seemed like affirmation. Then he pointed at certain human figures on the board and made a gesture to indicate larger or hairier. "You're suggesting that some humans who were particularly tall or robust might carry genetic markers from your people," I said. Lisa, who'd been watching this exchange, spoke up. "The legends, all the indigenous stories about marriages between humans and forest spirits, the tales of giants and family lineages. What if those weren't myths? What if they were actual historical memories of interbreeding?" Erato nodded emphatically. Then he drew something that made me catch my breath, a timeline, the past, the present, and then a question mark for the future. He pointed at his people's dwindling numbers, then at the human figures spreading everywhere. He made a gesture that clearly asked, "What happens to us now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Your population is critically small. In genetic terms, you're probably too few to survive long-term without severe inbreeding problems." Erato nodded sadly. He had already figured that out. "But maybe," I said slowly, an idea forming, "maybe we can help. If we revealed your existence to the world, we could protect your territories, prevent human encroachment, maybe even help increase your numbers through conservation efforts." Erato's reaction was immediate and violent. He shook his head frantically, making distressed vocalizations. He drew on the board with quick, harsh strokes. Humans with cameras, guns, tranquilizer darts, cages, laboratories. His people being captured, studied, imprisoned. "You're right," Sarah said quietly. Elias, we've seen what humans do to rare species. We study them, tag them, track them. We destroy their way of life in the name of protecting them. Erato drew one more image. His people free in the forest. Hidden, yes. Declining, yes, but free. Then he drew them surrounded by humans in facilities like this one. Protected, perhaps, but caged. He pointed at the second image and made a gesture that clearly meant death. Not physical death, but death of their identity, their culture, their freedom. So, we keep your secret, I said. We protect you by not revealing you. Is that what you want? He nodded. Then he drew something else. A few human figures separated from the rest. He pointed at us, Sarah, Marcus, Lisa, and me. A small group of humans who knew the truth and kept it. Guardians of the secret. We can do that, I promised. We'll protect your people by protecting your secret. 2 days later, Erato was healed enough to go home. The leg would take more time to fully recover, but he could walk, and he was desperate to return to his family. We packed supplies for him, medications, bandages, food for the journey. I had mapped out a route that would avoid human contact, taking him through the most remote parts of the forest back to his territory. I want to come with you, I told him the night before his departure. I want to see where you live, meet your family, learn more. Erato looked at me with those intelligent eyes, considering. Then he nodded slowly and drew on the whiteboard. He sketched a warning: steep terrain, difficult hiking, cold nights. He was telling me it wouldn't be easy. I'm ready, I said. I've done fieldwork in remote locations before. I can handle it. Sarah was less enthusiastic about my plan. Elias, we don't know what we're dealing with. What if there are more of them and they're not friendly? What if they see you as a threat? Then Erato will explain that I'm not, I said, gesturing at our friend. This is the opportunity of a lifetime, Sarah, to observe an unknown human subspecies in their natural habitat, to document their culture, their way of life. I have to go. After much debate, Sarah agreed, with conditions. I would carry a satellite phone, check in twice daily, and Marcus would accompany me. We would bring medical supplies in case Erato's injuries worsened, and we'd document everything we safely could. We left at dawn, driving as far into the mountains as the roads would take us, then hiking on foot. Erato moved through the forest with practiced ease despite his healing leg, navigating terrain that seemed impassable to me. We hiked for 6 hours, moving deeper into the wilderness than any marked trail went, until we reached a valley so remote and hidden that I understood immediately why these beings had never been found. The valley was surrounded by steep ridges, accessible only through narrow passages that would be easy to miss. The valley floor was covered in old-growth forest with a clear stream running through it. Erato stopped at the edge of the valley and made a loud, carrying vocalization, a call announcing his return. For a moment, nothing happened. Then we heard answering calls from different parts of the valley, and slowly, figures emerged from the forest. 5 adults ranging from 7 to 9 feet tall, covered in hair that varied from dark brown to reddish brown. They approached cautiously, keeping their distance from Marcus and me, their attention fixed on Erato. Then 2 smaller figures burst from the trees, running toward us with unmistakable joy. Children, if I could call them that, maybe 4 and 5 feet tall, calling out in their language, sounds that were clearly Papa or the equivalent. Erato dropped to his knees, and the young ones threw themselves into his arms. The reunion was so human, so full of emotion, that I felt tears in my eyes. This was a father coming home to his children after they'd feared him dead. A female approached more slowly, larger than the juveniles but smaller than Erato, with lighter reddish fur. The mate, I realized. She and Erato touched foreheads, made soft vocalizations to each other. She examined his injuries, her hands gentle on the splint and cast. Then she looked at Marcus and me. Her eyes were wary, protective. She made a questioning sound to her mate. Who are these humans? Why are they here? Erato gestured for us to come closer. Slowly, carefully, we approached. The other adults formed a protective circle, ready to intervene if we posed any threat. Erato began signing, supplemented by vocalizations and gestures. He was explaining what had happened, the accident, the injury, how we'd helped. He pointed at his healing leg, at the splint on his arm. He made gestures that clearly indicated healing, care, kindness. The female studied us for a long moment. Then she did something that made my throat tight. She approached me directly, her height making me crane my neck to meet her eyes. She placed one massive hand on my shoulder, not threatening, but testing, evaluating. Then she made a gesture to Erato, something like approval or acceptance. She turned to the others and vocalized something that made them relax slightly. Over the next 3 days, we were allowed to stay in the valley, observe and document what we saw. It was the most extraordinary anthropological experience of my life. The group consisted of 3 family units living in close proximity: Erato's family, himself, his mate, and 2 offspring, an older male who appeared to be alone, possibly widowed, and a younger couple with an infant. They lived in structures that could barely be called shelters, more like carefully arranged branches and bark that provided protection from rain and wind while remaining camouflaged. They moved these shelters seasonally, following food sources and avoiding areas where humans might venture. Their material culture was minimal but sophisticated. They used stone tools, not elaborate but effective for the tasks they needed. They knew which plants were edible, which had medicinal properties. They hunted small game using traps and their considerable strength, and they fished using techniques that showed remarkable patience and skill. But what fascinated me most was their social structure and culture. They had language, complex vocalizations that carried meaning, supplemented by gestures and body language. They told stories to their young, teaching them about the world and their history. On our second day, the older male approached while Marcus and I were examining some of their stone tools. He made a gesture for us to follow and led us to an area of the valley where the ground was different, deliberately arranged stones forming slight mounds. "A cemetery," Marcus breathed. "They bury their dead." The old male confirmed this with a nod. He pointed at the graves, then at himself, making gestures that told a story. His mate was buried here, his siblings, his parents. This valley had been their territory for generations. He led us to one grave in particular, smaller than the others. He knelt beside it, touching the stones with a gentleness that transcended species. Then he looked at us and made a series of gestures. A child, his child, dead many years ago. "How?" I asked gently. He drew in the dirt, a human figure with a gun. "Hunters," he indicated. They'd shot at him and his family. His child had been hit. They'd run, but the young one had died from the wound. "I'm so sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. He looked at me with eyes that held ancient sadness, then made a gesture that seemed to mean, "This is why we hide. This is why we fear you." That night, sitting around a small fire, I watched the 3 families interact. The children played, wrestling and chasing each other with sounds that were unmistakably laughter. The adults prepared food, tended the fire, communicated with each other in their complex language. They were people, different from us in appearance, adapted to a different way of life, but fundamentally people. They had families, culture, history, emotions, intelligence. They loved their children, mourned their dead, told stories, and they were dying out. 37 individuals, I said to Marcus quietly. Even if we assume there are other groups we don't know about, the total population can't be more than a few hundred at most. They're functionally extinct. "What can we do?" Marcus asked. "We promised not to reveal them." "I don't know," I admitted. "If we tell the world, they lose their freedom. If we stay silent, they slowly disappear. Either way, we're watching the end of a people." Erato must have heard us talking. He approached and sat down beside us. He drew in the dirt with a stick, a timeline stretching into the future. He drew his people's population getting smaller, then eventually disappearing entirely. "You know you're going extinct?" I said. He nodded. Then he drew something else, a small group of humans, us. He pointed at us, then drew lines connecting us to his people. Then he drew symbols I'd come to recognize as meaning remember or tell. "You want us to remember?" I said. "When you're gone, you want someone to know you existed." "To tell your story." He nodded emphatically. Then he drew more images of his people's history, their culture, their way of life. He pointed at my recording equipment, at my notebooks. "Document everything," Marcus realized. "Bear witness. That's why you let us stay. You're not just tolerating us. You're actively choosing to share your culture with us because you know it's ending. You want someone to remember." Erato touched his chest, then pointed at his family, at the others in the valley. Then he pointed at the graves. Finally, he pointed at me and touched his chest again. The message was clear. When we're gone, our memory will live in you. "I promise," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'll document everything. I'll preserve your history, your culture, your story. And someday, when the time is right, I'll make sure the world knows. Not where you lived, not how to find you, but who you were, what you meant. That you were people, and you deserved better than what we gave you." He placed his hand on my shoulder, a gesture of trust, of understanding, of shared grief for what was being lost. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Erato woke me before dawn. His mate stood beside him, holding something wrapped in woven plant fibers. She placed it in my hands with a solemnity that made me realize this was important. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a stone tablet, intricately carved with symbols and images. Not just pictographs, but something more structured, script. My breath caught. Writing. These people had once had a written language, something they'd abandoned when forced into secrecy. Erato pointed at the tablet, then at me. His mate made a gesture of giving. "You're giving this to me?" I asked, stunned. "But this is your history, your knowledge." Erato shook his head. He pointed to the valley around us, then to the sky, then made a fading gesture. "Their world disappearing." Then he tapped my chest. "You must remember." "I will," I promised. "But there must be something more we can do, some way to help." He shook his head slowly. Then he pointed toward the distant mountains, tracing a path with his finger. I understood there were other small groups scattered across the range, fewer than here, some even more remote. He couldn't tell me how many remained, only that they were dwindling. "Have you contacted them?" I asked. "Do you visit each other?" He hesitated, then made a gesture that meant too far, too dangerous. I understood. Crossing into human-occupied areas risked exposure. Many of their kind had already died that way. It was time for us to leave. The farewell was quiet, respectful. No dramatic embraces, no final speeches. That wasn't their way. They gathered near the tree line where sunlight filtered through the cedars, painting long golden shafts across the mossy ground. The children clung to their mother, while Erato stood beside us, calm and resolute. He placed a hand on my shoulder, then on Marcus's, a blessing, a goodbye. Then he signed one word we both understood clearly: remember. We bowed our heads, then turned to begin the long journey out of the mountains. The hike back felt heavier than the journey in. Every crunch of leaves under my boots reminded me we were leaving behind a world few humans had ever seen, a world that might not exist in a few decades. The forest seemed to sense the weight of our departure, each whisper of wind through the branches like a quiet lament. Marcus walked in silence, occasionally glancing over his shoulder, as though expecting to see one of our hosts again. But we saw no one. If they were watching, they remained hidden, guardians of a secret older than our civilization. When we reached our vehicle, I felt a pang of disbelief. The steel frame and dusty windshield looked impossibly out of place after the ancient serenity of the valley. It was as if we had stepped out of a dream and back into a world that suddenly seemed too loud, too bright, too careless. On the drive back to the research facility, neither of us spoke until we were halfway down the mountain. Finally, Marcus broke the silence. "What are we going to tell them?" he asked. I opened my mouth, then closed it. The truth was impossible to convey in words, and yet hiding everything felt like betrayal. "We'll tell them we found a small, undocumented primate population," I said slowly. "We'll say it appears known threatening and should be left alone. No samples, no remains, nothing to study further." Marcus nodded, though I could tell the lie sat as poorly with him as it did with me. We arrived back at the facility to find Sarah and Lisa waiting anxiously. "Where is he?" Sarah asked immediately. "Home," I said simply. "He's safe." They exchanged a look. Not disappointment exactly, but something close to frustration. They had been hoping to continue learning, I knew, but they also understood the promise we had made. Sarah ushered us into the conference room. "Tell us everything." So we did, carefully. We described the valley, the family structure, the culture, the cave paintings. We explained the small population and the dangers they faced. We provided just enough detail to convey the seriousness of their situation, but omitted anything that might lead others to them. I felt the weight of the stone tablet tucked safely in my backpack as I spoke. I didn't reveal it, not yet. Even within our trusted circle, the fewer who knew, the safer the tablet would be. When we finished, the room was silent. "So they really are?" Lisa began. "Yes," I said. "A sister species to modern humans." Sarah took a slow breath. "Elias, what do we do with this information?" The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. "We do nothing," I said. "We protect them by protecting their secret. No publications, no press, no announcements. We lock the records. Only those in this room, plus Jennifer and Kyle, know the full truth. And no one says a word unless every one of us agrees." Marcus nodded. Lisa too. After a moment, Sarah agreed. "We keep the circle small." For a few weeks, that fragile peace held. We returned to routine tasks, habitat studies, genetic work, conservation projects. But something had shifted inside me. Every time I looked at the trees outside my office window, I imagined Arado and his family. I wondered what stories they were telling their children. I wondered if they still felt safe. Then, in early October, everything changed. It began with an email from Dr. Richard Holloway at the Department of Defense, a name I recognized from previous government contracts. The subject line was innocuous, "Inquiry about wildlife study." But the content sent a chill through me. "Dr. Mercer, it has come to our attention that the Cascade Research Institute recently treated an unidentified primate specimen. We're interested in learning more about this specimen and would like to schedule a site visit to discuss potential collaboration. This is a matter of national security." National security? For a supposed wildlife case? My hands were shaking as I deleted the email. I immediately called Sarah. "Someone knows," I told her. "Someone at the DoD. How is that possible?" The only people who knew were us, Jennifer, Kyle, and the wildlife officers who brought Arato in. "The officers," Sarah said quietly. "They must have reported it up their chain." "We need to warn Arato," I said. "If they're looking for him, his whole community could be in danger." "Elias, wait," Sarah urged. "Let's think this through. If you rush back up there, you could lead them straight to the valley. We don't even know who they are yet." She was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The next day, 2 black SUVs pulled into the facility parking lot. 4 men in suits emerged, led by a tall, lean man with close-cropped gray hair. They asked for me by name. "Dr. Elias Mercer?" the gray-haired man said when I met them in the lobby. "I'm Colonel James Blackwood, Department of Defense. These are my associates. We'd like to discuss your recent wildlife case." "I'm afraid I don't know what you're referring to," I said, keeping my voice steady. Blackwood smiled thinly. "Let's not waste time, Dr. Mercer. We know you had a Sasquatch specimen here. We know you treated it and released it. What we don't know is where you released it, and that's the information we need. If this is about the bear we treated last month?" "Dr. Mercer," Blackwood cut me off, "we have satellite imagery of the creature being transported to your facility. We have testimony from the wildlife officers, and we have recordings of your team discussing the specimen's genetic analysis. Now, we can do this the easy way, or we can shut down this facility and seize all your records. Your choice." My blood ran cold. They had been monitoring us. For how long? "Why does the Department of Defense care about an unidentified primate?" I asked. "National security," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Any potentially intelligent non-human species on U.S. soil falls under our jurisdiction. I think you'll need a court order to access our confidential research," I said. "Of course," Blackwood nodded. "We'll have that by morning. In the meantime, I suggest you consider cooperation. It would be better for everyone, especially your career." After they left, I gathered Sarah, Marcus, and Lisa in my office. "We need to destroy everything," I said. "All the samples, all the data, everything that could lead them to the valley." "Elias, that's illegal," Sarah protested. "That's government property now." "They're not property," I shot back. "They're people, and we promise to protect them." That night, I stayed late at the facility. I systematically destroyed every sample we had collected from Arado. Blood, tissue, hair, all of it. I deleted the DNA sequencing data from our servers and removed the backups. I was nearly finished when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I turned to find Blackwood standing in the doorway, flanked by 2 men with military posture. "I thought you might try something like this," he said calmly. "You're making a serious mistake, Dr. Mercer." "The only mistake was thinking I could trust the government to do the right thing," I replied. "You don't understand what's at stake here," Blackwood said, stepping into the room. "We've known about these creatures for decades." "They're not what you think they are." "What are they then?" I challenged. Blackwood studied me for a moment. "A threat. A potential threat to human dominance of this continent. We need to study them, understand them." "They're a dying species hiding in the mountains," I said. "How are they a threat to anyone?" "Because they're intelligent," Blackwood replied. "And any intelligent species competing for the same resources is a potential threat. It's evolutionary basics, Doctor. You should understand that better than most." I looked at the man, at his cold, calculating eyes, and realized something chilling. He believed what he was saying. To him, Erato and his people weren't fascinating relatives to be studied and protected. They were competitors to be controlled or eliminated. "I won't help you find them," I said firmly. "You already have," Blackwood smiled. "Your vehicle was tagged when you returned from your little expedition." "We've narrowed the search area considerably. It's only a matter of time." My heart sank. I had led them straight to Arado. "Dr. Mercer, you're hereby suspended from your position, pending an investigation into violation of government research protocols," Blackwood continued. "These men will escort you from the premises. Your security clearance is revoked, effective immediately." As they marched me out of my own laboratory, I managed to catch Sarah's eye across the hallway. She gave me the slightest nod, an acknowledgement, a promise to do what she could. I was placed under house arrest for my own protection, Blackwood claimed. 2 agents were stationed outside my home. I had no access to phones, internet, or any way to warn Erato. For 3 days, I paced my living room, desperate for a way to help, when a knock came at my back door in the middle of the night. It was Marcus. He had snuck through the woods behind my property. "They're gone," he said, as soon as I let him in. Blackwood and a team of 12 men. They left this morning with equipment, weapons, tracking gear. They're heading into the mountains. "We have to warn them," I said, grabbing my coat. "Sarah's already on it," Marcus replied. "She took the facility's helicopter, said she was conducting aerial surveys. She's going to try to reach the valley before Blackwood." "How do we get past my guards?" Marcus smiled grimly. "Already taken care of. I may have mentioned to them that there's a situation at the lab requiring their immediate attention. Something about a containment breach." We slipped out the back door and into Marcus's truck. The drive to the mountains was tense, each minute feeling like an hour. We had to take a different route than before, approaching the valley from the west rather than the south, where Blackwood would likely be. The hike was brutal. Steeper terrain, no trails, pushing through dense underbrush. By the time we reached the ridge overlooking the valley, night had fallen. In the moonlight, I could see the valley floor, and my heart stopped. There were lights down there, moving lights, flashlights. Blackwood's team had already arrived. "We're too late," Marcus breathed. "Maybe not," I said, studying the pattern of lights. "They're searching in a grid. They haven't found the shelters yet." We worked our way down the slope as quietly as possible. As we got closer, I could hear voices, terse commands, status reports. They were being methodical, professional. These weren't scientists. They were hunters. We reached the valley floor and skirted around the search pattern. I knew roughly where Erato's family shelter was located, in a dense thicket near the stream. But when we reached it, the shelter was empty. Fresh signs showed they had left in a hurry, discarded tools, food remains. "They knew someone was coming," Marcus whispered. "They evacuated. Team 2, report position." The voice was close, just on the other side of the thicket. We froze. "Team 2 at grid point 7, came the reply. "No signs yet. Wait, I've got tracks here, fresh, heading northeast." Northeast, toward the mountain pass. They were fleeing into the higher elevations, where the terrain was more treacherous, but where humans would have more difficulty following. "We need to reach them first," I said to Marcus. "Warn them, help them hide." "How? They've got a head start on everyone." I thought for a moment. "The old caves. Erato showed me on his map. There's a system of caves near the ridgeline. If they're trying to hide, that's where they'd go." We began making our way up the northeastern slope, staying parallel to the search teams, but out of sight. The climb was exhausting. Loose scree, thick vegetation, the kind of terrain that seems designed to slow humans down. But I was driven by a desperate need to reach Erato before Blackwood did. We had almost reached the ridgeline when we heard the helicopter. Its searchlight swept across the mountainside, illuminating the forest in harsh white light. I caught a glimpse of Sarah in the cockpit, her face tense as she scanned the terrain. Then another sound cut through the night, a distinctive vocalization, one I recognized immediately. Erato was signaling to his people, a warning call. The helicopter's light swung toward the sound, pinpointing its source. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The radio chatter intensified. Blackwood's voice cut through clearly. "All teams converge on that position. We've got them." Marcus and I ran, no longer caring about stealth. We crashed through the underbrush, slipping on rocks, branches whipping our faces. We reached a clearing and saw them. Erato's family, the older male, and the young couple with their infant huddled together at the base of a cliff. They were trapped between the rock face and the approaching search teams. Erato saw me, recognition flashing in his eyes. But there was something else there too, betrayal. He thought I had led them here. "It wasn't me," I called out, moving toward him with hands raised to show I meant no harm. "Erato, I didn't betray you. I came to warn you." The helicopter hovered overhead, its searchlight pinning the group in a circle of harsh brightness. I could see Sarah trying to pull away, to direct attention elsewhere, but it was too late. The first of Blackwood's men broke into the clearing, weapons raised. "Hold your position!" Blackwood's voice commanded as he emerged from the trees. "No one moves." I stood between Blackwood and Arato's family. "You don't understand what you're doing," I said. "These aren't specimens to be collected. They're a family. They're people." "Step aside, Dr. Mercer," Blackwood ordered. "This is now a military operation." "Why?" I demanded. "What threat do they pose? Look at them. They're terrified. They just want to be left alone." "That's not your call to make," Blackwood replied. "The government has been tracking these creatures since the 1950s. They're too valuable to leave running wild in the forest." "Valuable how?" Marcus asked, joining me. "Their DNA, for one thing," Blackwood said. "Imagine soldiers with their strength, their adaptability, their ability to survive in extreme conditions. The genetic enhancements alone could revolutionize warfare." I felt sick. "You want to weaponize them?" "I want to utilize a resource," Blackwood corrected. "Now stand aside or be removed." I didn't move. Behind me, I could feel Arato and his family watching, understanding enough of our exchange to know what was happening. They were being hunted, just as their ancestors had been for thousands of years. "If you take them," I said to Blackwood, "if you imprison them, study them, experiment on them, you'll be committing a crime against humanity. They are human, Colonel, a different branch, but human nonetheless." "That's a matter for our scientists to determine," Blackwood replied coolly. "Men, secure the specimens." 4 soldiers moved forward, tranquilizer guns raised. I stood my ground, and so did Marcus. The soldiers hesitated. "Sir," one of them said, "the targets are displaying clear signs of intelligence. Protocol suggests—" "I know the protocol," Blackwood snapped. "Proceed as ordered." What happened next was chaos. Sarah brought the helicopter lower, kicking up a swirl of dust and leaves that momentarily blinded everyone. In that moment of confusion, Arato made a decision. He touched my shoulder once, a goodbye, then gestured to his family and the others. They bolted, not away from the cliff, but toward it. I realized too late what they were doing. There was a narrow crack in the rock face, barely visible in the darkness, an entrance to the cave system. One by one, they squeezed through, the adults helping the children. Arato went last, pausing at the entrance to look back at me. Our eyes met across the clearing, and in that moment, I understood. This was his choice: retreat further into the shadows, deeper into hiding, rather than face captivity. He had chosen freedom for his family over any help we might offer. "Stop them!" Blackwood shouted, but it was too late. Arato disappeared into the crack. The soldiers rushed forward, but the opening was too narrow for humans to follow quickly. By the time they had widened it enough to pass through, Arato and his family would be deep in the cave system, a labyrinth they knew by heart. Blackwood turned to me, fury etched on his face. "You've just condemned them to a slow death, Doctor. Those caves run for miles. There are few exits, and we'll have them all covered. They have no food, no water. How long do you think they'll last?" "Longer than you think," I replied, thinking of how Arato's people had survived for millennia against all odds. They know these mountains better than any of us. The search continued for 2 weeks. Blackwood's team mapped the cave system, staked out every known exit, used thermal imaging and sound detectors to try to locate Arato's family. But they found nothing. It was as if the forest people had vanished into the earth itself. Eventually, the operation was scaled back. Blackwood was recalled to Washington, the teams withdrawn to a monitoring position. I was formally dismissed from my position at the Cascade Research Institute. My research discredited, my reputation destroyed. Sarah, Marcus, and Lisa faced investigations, but kept their jobs by claiming they had been misled by me. For months, I waited for news, some sign of what had happened to Arato and his family. Had they escaped the mountains entirely? Found another hidden valley? Or had Blackwood been right? Had I condemned them to a slow death in those caves? Winter came, sealing the mountains behind a wall of snow and ice. Access became impossible. I waited, haunted by the memory of those intelligent eyes, that gesture of goodbye. Spring came, the snow melted, and at the first opportunity, I returned to the valley alone. I didn't tell Sarah or Marcus. I needed to see for myself. I hiked for 2 days through terrain rougher than I remembered. When I finally reached the valley, my heart sank. It was empty. No shelters, no fires, no signs of recent habitation. Just silence. I searched for 2 days. No footprints, no tools, no traces except the carefully maintained graves, untouched and still honored. The forest people were gone. I don't know whether they left voluntarily, moving deeper into the mountains, or whether they were forced to flee. Perhaps they sensed danger long before we did. Perhaps they had known all along that their time in this valley was limited. Before I left, I returned to the cliff where I had last seen Arato. The entrance to the cave was still there, wider now where the soldiers had chipped away at it. I crawled inside, following the passage as it wound deeper into the mountain. After about 100 yards, the tunnel opened into a small chamber. On the wall, illuminated by my flashlight, was a painting, not ancient, but new. The pigments were still vibrant, the lines crisp. It showed a group of forest people walking away from mountains toward distant peaks. And at the edge of the image was a human figure, me, I realized, holding the stone tablet Arato had given me. I touched the fresh pigment with shaking fingers. They had left me a message, a goodbye, a direction. They had moved on, seeking safer ground, but they expected me to keep my promise. Remember, tell our story, protect what remains. I stood there for a long time in the quiet heart of the mountain and let myself grieve. Not just for Arato and his family, but for an entire branch of our shared humanity disappearing into shadow. Somewhere out there, they might still be alive, hidden, watching, waiting for the world to change or for memory to fade. I returned to civilization, carrying the tablet and my notes. I sealed away everything, photographs, sketches, recordings, in a climate-controlled archive. I made copies, hid them in secure places. If something happened to me, the record would survive, but the truth would remain silent until the world was ready. In the years since, I've watched the scientific community continue to debate the existence of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Yeti, dismissing them as hoaxes or misidentifications. I've seen government officials deny any knowledge of such creatures. I've listened to cryptozoologists speculate wildly, sometimes coming close to the truth, other times veering into fantasy. And I've kept my promise. I've protected their secret, preserved their story, honored their memory. But now, as I face my own mortality, I've decided it's time to share what I know. Not to reveal where they might still exist, not to expose them to further danger, but to ensure that someone remembers the truth. They were not monsters. They were not myths. They were people, a sister species to modern humans, intelligent, emotional beings who loved their families and wanted only to be left in peace. They were the last survivors of a parallel branch of humanity, one that evolved alongside us but chose a different path, harmony with nature rather than dominance over it. And perhaps that's why they were doomed. In a world increasingly controlled, monitored, and exploited by Homo sapiens, there was simply no room left for another type of human, especially one that reminded us of what we might have been, what we had lost in our relentless march towards civilization. The stone tablet sits on my desk as I record this. Its symbols and images tell a story thousands of years old. The story of two peoples who shared a common ancestor but grew apart, one to rule the world, the other to hide from it. The last words Arato signed to me play in my mind constantly. Remember us. And so I do. I remember Arato's gentle strength, his family's love, their culture preserved against impossible odds. I remember the promise I made in a fire-lit valley to bear witness to a dying people. I remember the truth about Bigfoot's origin, not a monster, not a missing link, but our brother species, our shadow selves, the path not taken. And perhaps, somewhere in the most remote mountains of this world, a few of them still survive, watching, waiting, remembering us too, the last wild humans on Earth.